Strength versus weakness, how the spirit overcomes your fleshly nature. There is a war inside every human being, a battle so ancient and so deep that most people spend their entire lives unaware of its true dimension. It is the quiet, persistent conflict between the spirit and the flesh, between the part of you that was designed to walk in truth and the part of you that is constantly pulled toward temptation, distraction, confusion, and self-sabotage. This conflict does not begin when you become an adult, nor does it wait for moments of crisis. It exists from the moment you begin to desire things, the moment you begin to choose, the moment you begin to discern the difference between what feels good and what is good. The flesh is not simply your physical body. It is the totality of impulses, instinctive cravings, reactive emotions, and self-centered desires that move without wisdom, without reflection, and without alignment to the higher purpose placed within you. The Spirit, on the other hand, is the breath of God within you, the eternal dimension of your being that calls you to rise above instinct, above ego, above fear, above the compulsions that drain your strength and corrode your clarity. This conflict becomes especially intense in those who carry spiritual sensitivity, those who have been called to walk deeper, see clearer, and stand stronger. When you are called to a higher purpose, the pull of the flesh does not disappear. In fact, it grows more aggressive. Darkness fights what has been chosen by light, and the flesh becomes the battlefield where this resistance takes form. Every temptation, every emotional collapse, every internal conflict is not random. It is evidence of the war within you. Yet the purpose of this war is not your destruction. The spirit within you does not fight to erase your humanity, but to elevate it. Strength is not the absence of weakness, but the mastery of it. It is the spirit's ability to command what the flesh attempts to control. It is the awakening of clarity where confusion once ruled. It is learning to listen to the whisper of truth above the noise of impulse. Many believers misunderstand this journey. They assume that walking in the Spirit means never struggling again, never feeling desire, never confronting internal contradictions. But the truth is this: your spirit grows strong because your flesh resists. Your spiritual muscles develop through the pressure of temptation, through the tension of choice, through the friction of repeated internal battles. Every time your spirit says no to what your flesh craves, you are not losing freedom, you are reclaiming it. This text is an exploration of this inner battlefield. Each topic will go deeper into the mechanics of spiritual strength, the traps of the fleshly nature, the reasons this war intensifies, and the strategies God provides for overcoming the nature that seeks to dominate you. You will understand why your struggles are not signs of failure, but signs of calling. You will see why the spirit must lead and the flesh must submit, and why submission of the flesh is the doorway to freedom, clarity, peace, power, and purpose. We begin with the foundation, understanding the nature of this conflict and why it exists in every human soul. Only then can we learn how the spirit rises with authority to overcome the weaknesses that once defined us. The inner war. Why the flesh fights the spirit so violently deep within every individual lies a dual nature that operates constantly, whether consciously or unconsciously. One part seeks what is eternal, grounded, pure, and aligned with a higher purpose, while the other operates on impulse, survival instinct, craving, and emotional volatility. This duality is not a flaw in human design, but a consequence of the spiritual reality we inhabit. The flesh is born out of the natural world, shaped by physical impulses and temporal desires. The spirit is breathed from God Himself, shaped by eternal truths and divine intentions. When these two forces occupy the same life, conflict is inevitable. They are opposite in nature, opposite in direction, opposite in their vision for your life. One seeks to elevate, the other seeks to consume. One is patient, the other is desperate. One is aligned with truth. The other seeks immediate gratification, even at the cost of long-term destruction. To understand why the spirit must overcome the flesh, you must first understand why the flesh fights so violently and why that fight becomes more intense the closer you move towards spiritual awakening. The flesh is ruled by instinct. Instinct is not inherently evil, but it is blind, reactive, and untempered by wisdom. Instinct seeks pleasure, relief, survival, and dominance. It does not consider consequences, purpose, calling, or legacy. The flesh craves what is easy rather than what is transformational. It desires comfort above growth, approval above authenticity, indulgence above discipline, and escape above responsibility. These impulses are the foundation of its power. The flesh gains strength when your emotions overpower your reflection, when your cravings silence your conscience, and when your impulses move faster than your awareness. It thrives in chaos, distraction, noise, and emotional instability. When life becomes difficult, the flesh whispers, "Do what feels good right now. Forget the bigger picture." And if your spirit is not awake, that voice becomes dominant. The spirit, however, operates from a place of intention. The spirit sees further than the moment. It is aware of the greater purpose behind every experience, every challenge, and every emotion. The spirit does not deny the reality of desire or pain, but seeks to transform them. Where the flesh says, "Avoid suffering," the spirit says, "Grow through it." Where the flesh says, "Take what you can now," the spirit says, "Wait for what aligns with truth." Where the flesh says, "React with anger," the spirit says, "Respond with clarity." Where the flesh says, "You are alone," the spirit says, "You are guided." This fundamental opposition is why conflict emerges. The spirit calls you upward, while the flesh pulls you downward. The spirit invites transformation, while the flesh clings to old patterns. The spirit seeks alignment with God's will, while the flesh seeks dominance over your will. This is why the war exists. Both forces want authority over your decisions, your emotions, your habits, and your destiny. But the war intensifies when you begin to awaken spiritually. Before awakening, the flesh dominates easily because the spirit is quiet, ignored, or undeveloped. The individual lives in a state of reaction, driven by impulses, fears, desires, and external influences. The flesh sits on the throne without competition. But when the spirit awakens, the flesh becomes threatened. This is when resistance intensifies. Temptations grow stronger, emotional volatility increases. Old habits resurface with new force. The mind becomes clouded, confused, or conflicted. This is not a sign that you are failing. It is a sign that the flesh recognizes it is losing territory. The enemy does not fight what does not threaten him. The flesh does not resist what it already controls. The moment the spirit starts reclaiming ground is the moment the flesh begins to fight more violently. One of the greatest misunderstandings believers have is misinterpreting this increased internal conflict as weakness. They assume that if their spirit were truly strong, they would no longer struggle. But the presence of struggle is not evidence of weakness, it is evidence of transformation. If you were still spiritually asleep, there would be no war at all, only surrender to the flesh. The very fact that you feel the tension, recognize the conflict, and sense the pull in opposing directions means your spirit is active, alive, and engaged. It means the flesh is being challenged for the first time. The flesh does not simply give up because the spirit awakens. It tries to negotiate, manipulate, attack, and reassert control. It uses familiar desires, old wounds, emotional triggers, and past patterns to lure you back into submission. It tells you that seeking spiritual growth is unnecessary, too difficult, or too slow. It convinces you that comfort is more valuable than purpose, and that the temporary satisfaction of desire is worth sacrificing long-term peace. It offers relief but never healing, pleasure but never fulfillment, escape but never freedom. The spirit, however, grows stronger through resistance. Every time you choose self-control over impulse, your spirit gains authority. Every time you observe your emotions instead of obeying them, your spirit expands its influence. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you say no to what weakens you, every time you say yes to what disciplines you, your spirit becomes more dominant. The flesh weakens not by suppression, but by replacement. The more you feed the spirit through reflection, prayer, discipline, introspection, truth, and obedience, the less power the flesh holds. Yet this process is not instantaneous. It is not a single victory, but a continuous series of choices, some small, some monumental. The enemy of your spirit is not a single temptation, but the accumulation of unconscious habits that keep you chained to old identities. The flesh thrives on autopilot. Spiritual strength thrives on awareness. When you become aware of the impulses that pull you, you begin to see that you have the authority to choose differently. And the more you choose differently, the stronger your spirit becomes. Another reason this internal war feels so intense is because the flesh is loud while the spirit is quiet. The flesh screams through cravings, anxiety, fear, jealousy, anger, emotional impulses, and immediate desires. The spirit whispers through intuition, conviction, peace, clarity, and gentle redirection. Most people assume that the louder voice must be the true voice. But the loudest voice is usually the most desperate. The flesh depends on noise because silence exposes its weakness. When you become still, you feel your true self. When you remove distractions, you hear your spirit. When you slow down, you regain control. This is why spiritual disciplines such as prayer, fasting, meditation, and solitude are so powerful. They weaken the influence of the flesh by strengthening the sensitivity of your spirit. The flesh also fights the spirit because it fears death. Every spiritual breakthrough represents the death of an old version of you. Every moment of clarity kills a lie you once believed. Every act of discipline kills a habit that once controlled you. Every step toward purpose kills an identity rooted in pain, fear, or confusion. The flesh senses this death and resists it. It convinces you that the old version of you is safer, more familiar, easier to maintain. It tells you that transformation is dangerous, that growth is unnecessary, that spiritual awakening will cost you too much. And indeed, it does cost you. It costs you your illusions, your attachments, your excuses, your addictions, and your false identities. But in exchange, it gives you strength, clarity, purpose, stability, and authentic freedom. The inner war also intensifies when God is preparing you for a greater calling. When a person has a destiny, the spiritual battle is fiercer because the consequences of their choices are greater. The enemy fights those who carry influence, those who carry spiritual sensitivity, those who carry generational purpose. If your life had no spiritual significance, you would not face such intense internal conflict. The flesh would have no need to resist so violently. The magnitude of your battle is often the first indicator of your calling. A quiet soul without purpose experiences little resistance. A chosen soul experiences warfare. In understanding this, you begin to see the internal conflict not as a sign of failure, but as confirmation that your spirit is awakening, your purpose is unfolding, and your destiny is being activated. The tension you feel is the stretching of your soul as it expands beyond the limitations of the flesh. The discomfort you feel is the breaking of old patterns that no longer fit who you are becoming. The confusion you feel is the shedding of old identities that are incompatible with the truth God is revealing within you. When you see the war for what it truly is, you stop fighting yourself and start fighting strategically. You stop condemning yourself for feeling temptation and begin strengthening your spirit to overcome it. You stop assuming internal struggle means spiritual weakness and begin recognizing it as an invitation to grow. You stop viewing the flesh as an enemy you must hate and begin understanding it as a nature you must train. The flesh is not meant to be annihilated but brought under submission. When the Spirit leads, the flesh follows. But when the flesh leads, the Spirit is silenced. This is where true spiritual strength begins, not in perfection, not in the absence of weakness, but in the awareness of the battle and the willingness to confront it daily. Every individual who has ever aligned deeply with spiritual truth has walked through this same conflict. No prophet, no apostle, no spiritual leader has escaped this war. What separated them from the rest of humanity was not the absence of temptation, but their commitment to strengthening the spirit to overcome it. Your flesh will always seek to influence your decisions. Your spirit must always be ready to respond with clarity. This dynamic tension is part of your human journey, but it is also part of your spiritual elevation. The spirit grows not in the absence of opposition, but because of it. The flesh shows you where healing is needed, where discipline must be built, where wisdom must be applied, and where truth must be embraced. The war within you is not a punishment, it is preparation. It builds endurance, strengthens your spiritual muscles, sharpens your awareness, and teaches you to rely on God rather than your impulses. When you understand this, you stop fearing the battle and begin embracing the transformation it produces. This inner war will continue as long as you breathe, but victory does not come from eliminating conflict. It comes from aligning consistently with your spirit until its voice becomes stronger than the flesh. Over time, this alignment becomes your natural state. The flesh may still whisper, but it no longer commands. Temptation may still appear, but it no longer controls. Emotions may still rise, but they no longer dominate. Your spirit becomes the leader, and the flesh becomes the follower. This is the beginning of victory, the foundation of spiritual strength, and the first step toward becoming the person God has called you to be. At the end of this first topic, if this message resonates with you, if you feel the truth stirring in your spirit, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you can continue this journey of awakening, understanding, and transformation with every message shared here. And how the flesh sabotages your growth, and how the spirit rebuilds you from within. The struggle between spirit and flesh becomes most visible not in dramatic moments of temptation, but in the quiet, subtle patterns that slowly shape your behavior, your emotions, your choices, and your identity. Most people imagine the flesh only as impulsive desires, moral weaknesses, or sinful cravings. But the truth is far deeper. The flesh is every mechanism within you that keeps you tied to an old version of yourself. It is not just temptation, but resistance, not just craving, but avoidance, not just weakness, but the persistent pull toward stagnation. The flesh sabotages your growth in ways that feel natural, comfortable, familiar, and often disguised as self-protection. This is why so many remain bound to cycles that drain their potential and silence their spiritual sensitivity. Understanding how the flesh sabotages your growth is not about shame, but about awareness, because awareness is the first tool of transformation. You cannot defeat what you do not understand, and you cannot rise above what you refuse to see. One of the most powerful ways the flesh sabotages spiritual growth is by anchoring you to your past. The flesh is deeply attached to familiarity, even when that familiarity is painful. People remain in destructive habits, toxic relationships, limited mindsets, and old patterns because the flesh prefers what it knows. The unknown, even when full of promise, feels threatening. The flesh whispers that what is familiar is safer, more predictable, easier to navigate. It convinces you that change is too risky, too painful, too uncertain. This attachment to the past becomes a psychological cage. The spirit, however, calls you forward. It speaks through intuition, conviction, restlessness, and inner awakening, urging you to step into something new, shed old identities, and embrace transformation. The conflict between these two forces creates internal tension. The flesh says, "Stay where you are, even if it hurts." The spirit says, "Move forward, even if the path is unclear." This tension becomes the battlefield where destiny is either embraced or forfeited. Another sabotage of the flesh lies in its relationship with comfort. The flesh worships comfort because comfort requires no discipline, no sacrifice, no obedience, and no internal restructuring. Comfort numbs the pain, but never heals it. It creates the illusion of peace while hiding the roots of turmoil. But spiritual growth requires discomfort. The Spirit leads you into places where you must confront the truth you avoided, release what you clung to, forgive what wounded you, and rise above what tried to define you. The flesh resists this because growth feels like death to the old self. Every act of growth threatens the flesh's dominance. So the flesh produces excuses, distractions, emotional discouragement, and self-doubt. It tells you that you are tired, that you need rest, that you will try again tomorrow, that you are not ready, that the desire for comfort is self-care rather than sabotage. The spirit, however, seeks stretching. It knows that discomfort is the gateway to transformation. It knows that discipline produces strength, endurance, clarity, and spiritual authority. It knows that temporary discomfort produces eternal reward. This is why awakening often begins with disruption. The spirit disturbs you, so you do not remain trapped in the illusion of comfort that slowly destroys you. The flesh also sabotages growth through emotional reactivity. Most people believe emotions are truth, but emotions are often impulses wrapped in intensity. The flesh thrives through emotional chaos because a reactive person cannot hear the spirit. Anger blinds, fear paralyzes. Anxiety distorts perception, jealousy poisons judgment, and discouragement weakens conviction. These emotional states create internal noise so loud that the whisper of the spirit becomes nearly impossible to discern. The flesh uses emotions to keep you controlled, unstable, exhausted, and confused. When you are led by emotions, you make decisions that sabotage your future, destroy relationships, and reinforce negative patterns. But the Spirit teaches emotional mastery. It does not suppress emotions, but brings them under alignment. It teaches you to observe your emotions without obeying them. It teaches you to respond instead of react. It gives you discernment to separate emotional impulses from spiritual truth. It gives you peace that surpasses understanding, not because circumstances change, but because your position within them changes. A calm spirit is more powerful than a storm of emotions, and when your spirit leads, your emotions become signals rather than masters. Another form of sabotage comes through distraction. The flesh feeds on noise, constant stimulation, and external activity. It needs distraction because silence exposes the truth, and reflection awakens the spirit. The modern world is perfectly designed to strengthen the flesh. Endless scrolling, constant comparison, entertainment without rest, attention fragmented into 1,000 directions. The flesh thrives in this climate because distraction prevents spiritual awakening. You cannot hear God while drowning in noise. You cannot discern purpose while consumed by comparison. You cannot feel the pull of destiny when you are numbed by overstimulation. The Spirit rebuilds you by calling you into stillness. Stillness is not the absence of movement, but the presence of alignment. When you become still, your inner world becomes visible. The Spirit reveals your wounds, your patterns, your potential, and your calling. This can feel overwhelming at first, which is why many run back to distraction. But the transformation of the Spirit always begins with stillness. God speaks clearest to those who have learned to quiet the noise around them. Another form of sabotage comes through fear. Fear is one of the flesh's strongest weapons because fear paralyzes the spirit's momentum. The flesh uses fear to keep you small, silent, hidden, and limited. Fear tells you that failure is inevitable, that rejection is certain, that you are unworthy, unprepared, incapable, or alone. Fear magnifies obstacles and minimizes possibilities. It paints worst-case scenarios and convinces you that safety lies in inaction. The flesh uses fear to prevent you from stepping into moments that would change your life. Fear is the gatekeeper of destiny. Most people never step through that gate because the flesh convinces them that staying where they are is safer. But the Spirit rebuilds you by confronting fear with truth. The Spirit reminds you that fear is a liar, that your path is guided, that you are equipped for the battles you face, and that every step of faith activates divine intervention. The Spirit teaches courage not as the absence of fear, but as the ability to move forward despite it. When the Spirit leads, fear loses its authority. One of the most subtle ways the flesh sabotages you is by creating false identities. The flesh wants you to define yourself by your past, by your wounds, by your failures, by your insecurities, by labels others placed on you, and by the limitations you once believed. But the Spirit gives identity based on truth, not on history. The Spirit calls you a child of God, chosen, set apart, renewed, strengthened, and capable. When your identity is rooted in the flesh, you remain trapped in cycles of shame, inadequacy, and self-sabotage. You continue behaving like the person you used to be, even after God has begun transforming you. When your identity shifts to the Spirit, your behavior follows. You begin to walk in authority, clarity, and intentionality. You make choices aligned with who you are becoming, not who you once were. Identity is the soil where all habits grow. If the soil is corrupted by lies, your habits will reflect those lies. If the soil is renewed by truth, your habits will reflect transformation. Another sabotage of the flesh is its addiction to instant gratification. The flesh cannot wait. It demands satisfaction now, relief now, fulfillment now. It cannot tolerate delay because delay requires discipline. It cannot tolerate patience because patience strengthens the spirit. The flesh convinces you that you need immediate payoff, immediate pleasure, immediate comfort. This impatience is one of the greatest threats to spiritual growth because spiritual transformation is gradual, layered, progressive, and slow by design. God builds you over time so you can sustain what He gives you. But the flesh wants results without process. It wants blessings without obedience, intimacy with God without surrender, growth without sacrifice, and wisdom without reflection. When you fall into the trap of impatience, you sabotage your own destiny. You settle for less because waiting requires strength. You compromise because discipline feels too painful. But the Spirit rebuilds patience in you by stretching your endurance. It teaches you that what is meant for you will come at the right time, not when your flesh demands it. It teaches you that the process is shaping your character, your resilience, and your capacity for responsibility. Patience is not a delay of reward, it is preparation for reward. The flesh also sabotages through pride. Pride blinds you to your faults, prevents repentance, blocks wisdom, and isolates you from guidance. Pride convinces you that you must rely solely on your own strength, that vulnerability is weakness, that asking for help is failure. Pride leads to arrogance, stubbornness, defensiveness, and spiritual stagnation. But the Spirit rebuilds you through humility. Humility is not self-deprecation but self-awareness. It is acknowledging that you need God, that you need growth, that you need refinement. Humility opens the door to wisdom because it recognizes that you have more to learn. Humility brings you into alignment because it removes the illusion of self-sufficiency. God resists the proud, but elevates the humble, not because humility makes you small, but because humility makes you receptive to transformation. Another sabotage of the flesh comes through comparison. Comparison poisons your perception of yourself and others. It steals gratitude, breeds insecurity, and produces resentment. Comparison convinces you that you are behind, that your journey is insufficient, that your progress is slow, that others are more blessed, gifted, or favored. But the Spirit rebuilds you by reminding you that your path is unique, your timing is purposeful, and your identity is incomparable. The Spirit teaches gratitude, which neutralizes comparison. When you walk in gratitude, you recognize the beauty of your own journey and the significance of your own growth. You stop measuring yourself against others and begin focusing on who you are becoming. The flesh also sabotages growth through guilt and shame. Guilt can awaken conviction, but shame destroys identity. Shame tells you that you are your mistakes, that you are unworthy, broken beyond repair, beyond forgiveness. Shame is the language of the flesh, because shame keeps you bound to the past. The Spirit rebuilds you through forgiveness. Forgiveness is not only the gift God gives to you, but the gift He teaches you to give yourself. Forgiveness frees you from the weight of your past so you can walk into your future. The Spirit does not deny your mistakes, it transforms them into wisdom. It does not erase your past, it redeems it. Another sabotage of the flesh lies in hopelessness. The flesh convinces you that nothing will change, that growth is impossible, that your patterns are permanent. It tells you that your efforts are wasted, that your prayers are unheard, that your transformation is too slow. Hopelessness weakens your will and extinguishes your spirit. But the Spirit rebuilds hope through divine perspective. It reminds you that God has never abandoned you, that transformation is already happening beneath the surface, that every step forward matters, even when progress feels invisible. Hope is not wishful thinking, but spiritual awareness of God's involvement in your journey. Finally, the ultimate sabotage of the flesh is spiritual blindness. When the flesh dominates, you become disconnected from God's voice, God's vision, and God's direction. You begin to rely on your own understanding, which leads to confusion. You make decisions based on impulse rather than discernment. You misinterpret your circumstances and lose sense of purpose. But the Spirit rebuilds your vision. It opens your inner eyes to truth. It gives discernment to distinguish deception from revelation. It teaches you to walk by faith rather than sight, allowing your life to be guided not by external circumstances, but by internal conviction. The beautiful truth is this: every area where the flesh sabotages you is an area where the Spirit can rebuild you. The flesh breaks, the Spirit restores. The flesh enslaves, the Spirit frees. The flesh confuses, the Spirit clarifies. The flesh weakens, the Spirit strengthens. The flesh destroys identity, the Spirit reveals identity. Every struggle is an invitation for transformation. Your weaknesses do not condemn you. They guide you to the places where the Spirit is ready to work. Growth is not about eliminating the flesh, but about giving the Spirit authority over it. When the Spirit leads, the flesh loses its power. When the Spirit becomes strong, the sabotage becomes ineffective. This is how transformation unfolds, not through one dramatic moment, but through daily alignment, daily surrender, daily awareness, and daily acts of obedience. If this message is speaking to your soul, if you feel the call to grow stronger in spirit and rise above what has tried to hold you back, I invite you now to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the teachings that will guide, strengthen, and awaken you on your journey. The process of inner reconstruction, how the Spirit rebuilds what the flesh has broken. The journey of spiritual transformation does not begin when a person feels strong. It begins when a person finally recognizes the depth of what is broken. The flesh, with all its impulses, fears, wounds, cravings, and illusions, leaves behind a trail of emotional debris that accumulates through the years. People often believe their greatest battles are external, but the truth is that the deepest damage happens within. It happens in the thought patterns that limit your potential, the emotional reflexes that sabotage your relationships, the internal narratives that distort your identity, and the unconscious habits that quietly drain your strength. The flesh leaves behind ruins that cannot be repaired through willpower alone. This is why the spirit becomes essential. The spirit does not simply suppress the flesh, it rebuilds the internal world the flesh has damaged. True transformation is less about behavior modification and more about internal reconstruction, a process that unfolds layer by layer, often invisibly, often slowly, often painfully, but always intentionally. To understand how the Spirit rebuilds you, you must first understand the nature of spiritual reconstruction. When God begins His work within a person, He does not start by polishing the surface. He begins by digging into the foundations. The flesh operates horizontally, through actions, impulses, visible expressions. The Spirit operates vertically, through identity, truth, conviction, and alignment. This distinction is important because many people attempt to change their behavior without addressing their internal structure. They try to discipline themselves outwardly, while inwardly remaining fragmented. They attempt to fix habits while ignoring the beliefs that created those habits. They try to force spiritual fruit without cultivating spiritual roots. As long as the internal architecture remains weak, any change is temporary. The flesh will reclaim what it lost. This is why spiritual reconstruction is not a quick process. It is a dismantling and rebuilding of entire inner systems, many of which were shaped over years of emotional experiences, relationships, traumas, comforts, pride, avoidance, and survival mechanisms. One of the first steps the Spirit takes in rebuilding you is the restoration of self-awareness. For most people dominated by the flesh, awareness is clouded. They react but do not know why. They desire but cannot explain their hunger. They repeat destructive patterns without understanding their origins. They feel emotions intensely but cannot trace their roots. The flesh thrives in this blindness because blindness prevents change. Awareness is the beginning of spiritual authority. The Spirit awakens you to yourself. It exposes the deeper motives behind your behaviors. It reveals the lies you believed without realizing it. It brings to light the wounds you ignored, the patterns you inherited, the identities you absorbed from others. This can be an uncomfortable phase because seeing yourself clearly means acknowledging what you have avoided for years. Many people mistake this discomfort for failure, believing that spiritual awakening should feel peaceful. But the peace of the Spirit comes after the cleansing. Before the cleansing comes confrontation. The Spirit confronts everything within you that has weakened your foundation. It does not condemn you. It reveals you so you can finally be rebuilt. The second phase of reconstruction is the healing of internal wounds. Every person carries wounds. Some recognized, some buried, some unexpressed, some normalized. The flesh often hides these wounds beneath coping mechanisms: distraction, anger, avoidance, busyness, achievement, indulgence, or emotional suppression. But these wounds dictate behavior until they are healed. They create fears, insecurities, compulsions, emotional instability, and relational dysfunction. They distort identity, warp perception, and limit spiritual sensitivity. The Spirit heals these wounds not by erasing the memories, but by transforming their meaning. Healing is not forgetting. It is reclaiming authority over what once controlled you. The Spirit touches places the flesh cannot reach. Deep emotional impressions, subconscious beliefs, and unspoken pains. It brings peace to memories that once brought torment. It brings closure to events that once felt unfinished. It brings forgiveness where resentment once lived. It brings light into inner shadows. Many people do not realize that their inability to grow spiritually is often tied to wounds they never healed. The flesh uses these wounds to maintain control, but the Spirit heals them to release you into freedom. The third phase of reconstruction is the reprogramming of thought patterns. The mind is the battlefield where the flesh often wins its victories because thoughts create the framework through which you interpret your reality. If your thoughts are shaped by fear, your choices will reflect fear. If your thoughts are shaped by scarcity, your decisions will reflect scarcity. If your thoughts are shaped by shame, your identity will reflect shame. The flesh builds mental strongholds, repetitive patterns of thinking that keep you trapped. These strongholds can be statements like, "I am not enough," "I will always fail," "I cannot change," "I don't deserve love," "God has abandoned me," "I am damaged," "Nothing will improve for me." These thoughts feel natural because they have been repeated for years. They become internal narratives that guide your emotions, habits, and expectations. The Spirit rebuilds your mind by replacing these narratives with truth. Truth is not merely information, it is alignment. When truth enters your mind, it dismantles lies that have lived there for years. The Spirit renews your thinking through conviction, revelation, and clarity. You begin to see yourself differently, not through the lens of your past, but through the lens of God's intention for your future. Your thought patterns begin to shift, slowly at first, like small cracks in a wall, and eventually the old structure collapses. A renewed mind is one of the strongest indicators that the Spirit is rebuilding you. The fourth phase of reconstruction is the strengthening of discipline. The flesh operates through impulse, but the Spirit operates through intentionality. Discipline is the bridge between desire and transformation. Many people want spiritual growth but lack spiritual consistency. They seek breakthrough but avoid the habits that build spiritual endurance. The Spirit rebuilds discipline not through force, but through alignment. When your spirit gains clarity, your desires shift. When your desires shift, discipline becomes easier. Discipline is not meant to be a punishment, but a structure that supports your new identity. The Spirit strengthens discipline through small, repeated acts of obedience. It trains you to choose long-term purpose over short-term comfort. It teaches you to control your impulses, manage your emotions, redirect your attention, and remain rooted when distractions arise. As discipline grows, the flesh weakens because its power lies in your inability to pause, reflect, and choose differently. Discipline gives you authority over your choices. It transforms your daily actions into seeds that produce spiritual fruit. The fifth phase of reconstruction is the development of spiritual sensitivity. When the flesh dominates, sensitivity to the Spirit becomes muted. The noise of cravings, emotions, anxieties, and distractions drowns out the voice of God. But as the Spirit rebuilds you, your inner senses awaken. You begin to feel conviction more strongly. You sense when something is wrong before you can explain it. You feel guidance in the form of intuition aligned with truth. You discern deception quickly. You recognize when your flesh is speaking and when your spirit is speaking. This sensitivity is not emotional, it is spiritual. It is the inner awareness that allows you to walk in alignment even when circumstances are unclear. Spiritual sensitivity grows through quietness, consistency, obedience, and honesty. The more you listen to the Spirit, the louder it becomes. The more you follow its guidance, the clearer it becomes. This sensitivity becomes your compass, guiding you away from traps, distractions, and old patterns, and directing you toward purpose, clarity, and peace. The sixth phase of reconstruction is the restructuring of identity. Identity is the core of transformation. If your identity remains rooted in the flesh, your habits will reflect the flesh. If your identity becomes rooted in the Spirit, your habits will naturally reflect the Spirit. The flesh has spent years telling you who you are based on wounds, mistakes, labels, and limitations. The Spirit tells you who you are based on truth, calling, and divine intention. Spiritual reconstruction cannot be complete until identity shifts. This shift does not happen instantly. It unfolds as you internalize truth. You begin to see yourself as chosen, guided, capable, forgiven, renewed. You recognize that your past does not disqualify you but prepares you. You see that your weaknesses become places where God's strength is perfected. You see that you are not a victim of your impulses but a vessel capable of spiritual authority. Identity reconstruction is one of the most liberating experiences because it breaks the cycles that once felt unbreakable. When your identity rises, your life rises. Another essential aspect of inner reconstruction is the rebuilding of emotional resilience. The flesh produces emotional fragility because emotions become rulers instead of signals. When the flesh leads, a small offense becomes a crisis, a minor rejection becomes a wound, a simple delay becomes discouragement, a moment of failure becomes identity. The flesh amplifies emotions and then convinces you that their intensity means truth. But the Spirit rebuilds emotional resilience by teaching you how to feel without being controlled. You learn that not every emotion requires reaction. You learn that peace is not the absence of disturbance, but the refusal to be dominated by it. You learn that endurance is not numbness, but stability. Emotional resilience makes you unshakable. People cannot manipulate you easily. Circumstances cannot destabilize you quickly. Temptations cannot lure you effortlessly. Emotional resilience is one of the greatest gifts of spiritual reconstruction because it fortifies the inner world that once felt fragile. The next phase of reconstruction involves the restoration of purpose. The flesh thrives in aimlessness because an aimless person gravitates toward pleasure instead of progress. Without purpose, cravings grow stronger, distractions feel more appealing, and comfort becomes more attractive. Purpose is the antidote to spiritual drift. When the Spirit rebuilds you, one of the first things it restores is the sense of meaning. You begin to feel that your life is not random. You sense that your battles have shaped you for a reason. You recognize that your journey has direction. Purpose gives strength to discipline, clarity to decisions, and stability to emotions. Purpose transforms suffering into growth and setbacks into strategy. The Spirit reveals purpose gradually, often piece by piece, because purpose is not something you receive at once, but something you grow into. As your spirit strengthens, your purpose becomes clearer. Another critical part of reconstruction is the cleansing of desires. The flesh teaches you to desire what destroys you. It convinces you that fulfillment lies in indulgence, validation, escape, or dominance. But the Spirit purifies desire. It does not eliminate desire, it redirects it. You begin to desire growth over comfort, truth over illusion, alignment over approval, peace over stimulation, discipline over impulse, purpose over pleasure. When your desires shift, your temptations lose their power. The Spirit's work is not to suppress your cravings, but to transform their sources. A transformed heart no longer longs for what once enslaved it. As reconstruction continues, the Spirit also works to restore relational health. The flesh breaks relationships through pride, insecurity, emotional reactivity, selfishness, fear, and woundedness. The Spirit heals relationships by transforming the person within them. You become more self-aware, more patient, more honest, more grounded, more compassionate. You stop expecting others to fill voids. Only God can heal. You stop projecting your wounds onto others. You stop choosing relationships based on your brokenness and begin attracting relationships aligned with your healing. The Spirit rebuilds relational health not by changing others, but by changing you. The final phase of reconstruction is the establishment of spiritual authority. True authority is not dominance, but alignment. When your spirit becomes strong, the flesh no longer rules you. You become a person who moves from intention, clarity, conviction, and peace. Temptations still appear, but they no longer control you. Distractions still arise, but they no longer derail you. Emotions still fluctuate, but they no longer dominate you. You move with purpose, stand with resilience, speak with clarity, and walk with discernment. This authority is not arrogance, but stability. It is the natural result of an internal world rebuilt by the Spirit. Spiritual reconstruction is an ongoing process. It unfolds daily through small choices and inner shifts. It requires patience, honesty, surrender, and willingness. The flesh will resist every step of this process, but the Spirit is persistent, gentle, and unstoppable. What God rebuilds cannot be destroyed by the past. What the Spirit strengthens cannot be weakened by former patterns. What truth restores cannot be undone by lies. And so, if this journey resonates with your heart, if you feel the reconstruction happening within you even now, I invite you once again to subscribe to the channel so you can continue receiving messages that strengthen, guide, and awaken your spirit each day. The Daily Battle. How to walk in the Spirit while living in a flesh-driven world. Walking in the Spirit is not a momentary experience, nor is it a sudden transformation that happens in a single breakthrough. It is a daily journey, a deliberate posture of the heart, a continual alignment of intention, focus, and awareness. Every day, a person is confronted with dozens of opportunities to choose between the spirit and the flesh. These choices are not always dramatic. Many are subtle, seemingly insignificant, woven into ordinary moments. Yet over time, these small decisions accumulate and determine the direction of a person's inner life. Walking in the Spirit while living in a flesh-driven world requires more than spiritual enthusiasm. It requires vigilance, humility, persistence, and an understanding of the dynamics that govern both the spirit and the flesh. This daily battle is not a punishment but a path to mastery, a training ground where the Spirit develops authority, clarity, and resilience. To understand how to walk in the Spirit, you must first understand why the world around you reinforces the impulses of the flesh. Modern society is structured around speed, stimulation, indulgence, distraction, and constant gratification. Everything is designed to keep you externally focused and internally disconnected. People are encouraged to react quickly, consume endlessly, compare constantly, and pursue comfort above growth. This environment strengthens the flesh because the flesh seeks escape rather than alignment. The world offers countless ways to silence your spirit: entertainment that numbs, habits that distract, desires that intensify, fear that paralyzes, urgency that overwhelms. Walking in the Spirit requires swimming against these currents. It requires slowing down in a world that rushes, remaining present in a world that is distracted, cultivating depth in a world that is superficial, seeking truth in a world that thrives on noise. The daily battle begins the moment you wake up. The flesh awakens with you, ready to take control of your day through distractions, mood fluctuations, cravings, worries, and impulsive desires. The Spirit must be intentionally awakened. It does not impose itself. It waits for your willingness, your attention, your openness. This is why many spiritual traditions emphasize morning alignment. When the first moments of your day belong to the Spirit, the rest of your day gains structure. When your morning is ruled by the flesh, the day becomes reactive, chaotic, and fragmented. Walking in the Spirit begins with intentional orientation, recognizing that your strength does not come from your emotions, your impulses, or your circumstances, but from your alignment with what is eternal. The first battle of the day is not external, It is internal. It's about which voice you amplify and which one you silence. Throughout the day, the flesh attempts to regain dominance through patterns so familiar that you no longer notice them. One of these patterns is distraction. The flesh thrives when your attention is scattered. It does not want you to remain present because presence reveals truth. Remaining present allows you to recognize when your flesh is speaking. Distraction keeps you on autopilot, making choices without reflection, reacting without awareness. Walking in the Spirit requires cultivating presence. Presence is not a mystical experience. It is the ability to bring your awareness fully into the moment instead of letting external stimuli pull you away. When you are present, you notice your impulses instead of being controlled by them. You notice your thoughts instead of drowning in them. You notice the tone of your emotions before they escalate. Presence is spiritual because it gives the spirit space to influence your choices. Another pattern the flesh uses daily is emotional pressure. Emotions rise and fall constantly, influenced by stress, fatigue, interactions, expectations, and unresolved wounds. When emotions spike, the flesh attempts to seize control. It urges you to react impulsively, speak harshly, isolate yourself, indulge in comfort, or give in to self-pity. Walking in the Spirit does not require suppressing emotions, but navigating them. It requires observing your emotions without losing your grounding. It requires recognizing that emotions are temporary visitors, not permanent truths. When you walk in the Spirit, you learn to pause before reacting, allowing the Spirit time to speak before your flesh takes over. This pause, though small, is powerful. It interrupts cycles, diffuses impulses, and transforms your inner experience. The ability to pause is one of the most important spiritual skills you can develop. It is in the pause that you reclaim your authority. The flesh also uses mental noise as a daily weapon. Thoughts move rapidly, forming narratives about yourself, others, and your circumstances. Many of these thoughts are shaped by past wounds, fears, assumptions, and insecurities. They appear automatically, without your permission. If you do not examine these thoughts, they become the foundation for your decisions. Walking in the Spirit requires discerning your thoughts. You begin to recognize when your mind is being influenced by fear rather than truth, comparison rather than clarity, shame rather than identity, impulse rather than wisdom. When walking in the Spirit becomes a habit, you no longer accept every thought as reality. You challenge your thoughts. You question their origin. You align them with truth. This mental discipline is not achieved overnight, but grows stronger with practice. The Spirit rebuilds your mind by teaching you to guide your thoughts instead of being guided by them. Another way the flesh asserts itself daily is through desire. Desire is not inherently wrong. It is part of being human. But the flesh distorts desire, amplifying it, twisting it into craving, addiction, and self-centered pursuit. The flesh always wants more comfort, more pleasure, more affirmation, more distraction, more stimulation. This constant wanting drains your energy, disturbs your focus, and disconnects you from spiritual alignment. Walking in the Spirit requires transforming your relationship with desire. Instead of being pulled by desire, you evaluate it. You ask whether this desire strengthens you or weakens you, aligns you or distracts you, elevates you or diminishes you. The Spirit teaches you to desire things that build your character, deepen your peace, strengthen your purpose, and clarify your identity. When your desires change, your life changes. The flesh becomes quieter because it no longer has the power to lure you through the same pathways. Walking in the Spirit also requires dealing with the constant pull of external expectations. The world pressures you to meet standards that have nothing to do with your spiritual growth. Success defined by productivity, identity defined by appearance, worth defined by performance, and happiness defined by possession. These expectations strengthen the flesh because the flesh seeks validation. It wants to be seen, admired, accepted, applauded. The spirit, however, seeks authenticity over approval. It seeks alignment over validation. It teaches you that your worth is not determined by external measures, but by your inner truth. One of the most freeing aspects of walking in the Spirit is the release from external pressure. You no longer measure your value by comparison or social expectations. You become anchored within yourself. This anchoring gives you strength to walk your path even when others do not understand it. Another daily challenge of walking in the Spirit is resisting urgency. The flesh thrives in the feeling of urgency. Rushing decisions, reacting impulsively, fearing delay, panicking at uncertainty. Urgency narrows your perspective and disconnects you from wisdom. The Spirit operates through patience. Patience is not passivity. It is clarity. It is the ability to act at the right time instead of being forced by emotional agitation. When you walk in the Spirit, you begin to recognize that urgency is often a lie the flesh uses to create anxiety. You learn to slow down, breathe, and choose consciously instead of reacting automatically. This slowing down is an act of spiritual strength. It allows you to hear God's timing rather than your fears. Walking in the Spirit also requires daily honesty. The flesh avoids truth because truth exposes weakness. It creates excuses, justifies impulses, shifts blame, hides responsibility, and denies patterns. But the Spirit thrives in honesty. Honesty opens the door for transformation. It allows you to see where you are misaligned without feeling condemned. One of the most powerful spiritual practices is the daily act of self-examination, pausing to ask yourself whether you acted from the Spirit or from the flesh, whether your reactions aligned with your values, whether your choices reflected who you want to become. This habit builds self-awareness. It strengthens your spiritual muscles. It gradually rewires your impulses so that over time, choosing the Spirit becomes more natural. Another essential aspect of walking in the Spirit is discipline. Discipline is not harshness or rigidity. It is structure that protects your spiritual alignment. A disciplined life creates space for clarity. It builds habits that strengthen the spirit, such as prayer, reflection, stillness, intentional rest, mindful presence, gratitude, and restraint. The flesh resists discipline because discipline restricts impulse. It demands consistency. It demands intention. But the reward of discipline is inner freedom. The more disciplined your life becomes, the less control the flesh has over your choices. Walking in the Spirit also requires continual surrender. Surrender is not giving up, it is releasing control. It is acknowledging that your understanding is limited, that your strength is insufficient, that your perspective is incomplete. The flesh clings desperately to control because control gives it power. But surrender gives the Spirit access. Surrender invites God into your decisions, your fears, your wounds, your uncertainty. It transforms the burden of life into partnership, where the Spirit leads and you follow with trust. Surrender is one of the hardest aspects of spiritual living because the flesh does not want to let go. It wants predictability. It wants assurance. It wants guarantees. But true spiritual growth occurs only when you allow yourself to be guided. Another daily discipline required for walking in the Spirit is guarding your environment. The flesh is influenced by external factors, people, conversations, habits, atmosphere, and even digital consumption. Many people attempt to strengthen their spirit while living in environments that weaken them. But spiritual strength requires intentional boundaries. You must choose environments that nourish peace rather than chaos, growth rather than stagnation, truth rather than illusion. You must limit access to influences that darken your mind or awaken old patterns. The Spirit becomes stronger when your environment supports your transformation. Furthermore, walking in the Spirit requires courage. Every day presents opportunities to confront fear, resist temptation, break patterns, and walk away from what weakens you. The flesh seeks safety, but the Spirit seeks growth. Growth requires courage, the courage to be different, to be misunderstood, to choose truth over comfort, to walk alone when necessary, and to follow the whisper of God rather than the noise of the world. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move beyond it. One of the most overlooked aspects of walking in the Spirit is rest. The flesh exhausts you because it pushes you toward endless doing, endless consuming, endless proving. But the Spirit restores you. It invites you into rest that is not laziness but alignment. Rest is the place where your soul recalibrates. It is where you reconnect with your purpose, your identity, and your truth. Many people sabotage their spiritual walk through exhaustion. When your mind and body are depleted, the flesh gains advantage because spiritual sensitivity diminishes. Rest is spiritual protection. It is a declaration that you trust God enough to stop striving. Walking in the Spirit also requires forgiveness. The flesh holds grudges, replays offenses, feeds bitterness, and justifies resentment. But unforgiveness contaminates the spirit. It drains energy, blocks clarity, closes the heart, and anchors you to the past. The Spirit restores freedom through forgiveness. Forgiveness is not approval of wrongdoing, but release from bondage. It is letting go so you can move forward. Without forgiveness, walking in the Spirit becomes impossible because unforgiveness strengthens the flesh. Ultimately, the daily battle between flesh and spirit is won through consistency. You do not win the war in one dramatic moment, but through thousands of small choices, choosing stillness over distraction, truth over illusion, integrity over impulse, patience over urgency, surrender over control, awareness over autopilot. The more consistent you become, the easier the battle feels. The flesh loses its intensity because it no longer has unchecked authority. The Spirit becomes your default rather than your effort. Walking in the Spirit does not mean perfection. It means direction. It means returning to alignment again and again, even after moments of weakness. The flesh will never disappear entirely, but its dominance will. Over time, you will feel the shift. What once triggered you no longer controls you. What once tempted you no longer appeals to you. What once overwhelmed you no longer destabilizes you. Your inner world becomes quieter, clearer, more grounded. You begin to sense God more intimately. You begin to walk with confidence, clarity, and purpose. The world around you does not change, but your relationship to it does. You become anchored, guided, and resilient. If you feel this truth resonating with your spirit, if this journey feels like the path you are meant to walk, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you can continue receiving messages that strengthen, awaken, and empower your spiritual walk every day. The final victory: how the Spirit redefines your life, your identity, and your destiny. The journey towards spiritual mastery does not end with the weakening of the flesh, nor with the strengthening of the spirit. It culminates in a profound internal transformation where your identity, your desires, your perceptions, and your destiny are all redefined from the inside out. When the Spirit becomes the governing force of your inner world, everything in your external world shifts accordingly. Your relationships change, your habits change, your emotional responses change, your ambitions change, your sense of purpose changes, and even your understanding of yourself evolves into something truer, deeper, and far more resilient than the person you once were. The final victory of the Spirit is not a single moment, but a state of being. A new way of existing in the world, where the patterns of the flesh no longer hold authority, where the shadows of the past no longer dictate your future, and where every step you take is anchored in alignment rather than survival, truth rather than deception, peace rather than chaos, purpose rather than impulse. To understand the depth of this transformation, you must first understand that the flesh builds identities around fear, wounds, desires, and external validation. For years, you may have believed you were defined by your mistakes, your weaknesses, your failures, your insecurities, or the roles others projected onto you. You may have internalized narratives that were never meant to shape your destiny, that you were not enough, that you were too broken, that you were too late, too flawed, too unstable, too emotional, too wounded to truly change. The flesh uses these narratives to keep you tethered to a limited version of yourself, one that cannot access the fullness of your spiritual calling. But when the Spirit rises within you, these old identities begin to dissolve. You start to notice that the voice of shame becomes quieter, the voice of fear loses its grip, and the voice of truth grows stronger, clearer, more compelling. The Spirit reveals who you truly are, not in the sense of who the world told you to be, but who God designed you to become. The redefinition of identity that occurs through the Spirit is not a matter of adopting new labels, but shedding false ones. It is the recognition that you are not your impulses, not your habits, not your wounds, not your failures, not your fears, and not your past. You begin to understand that there is a version of you that has always existed beneath the layers of pain, confusion, distraction, and brokenness. This version of you is rooted in truth, aligned with purpose and empowered by the Spirit. As the Spirit becomes stronger within you, this truer identity emerges naturally, like a sculpture being revealed as the excess stone is chiseled away. The process is not about adding something new, but removing everything that is not authentically you. This is one of the most liberating revelations in the spiritual journey. The realization that transformation is not about becoming someone else, but becoming who you were always meant to be. As your identity shifts, your relationship with time also changes. The flesh lives in the past and the future. It obsesses over mistakes, regrets, memories, disappointments, while simultaneously worrying about outcomes, anxieties, fears, and uncertainties. This temporal instability creates emotional chaos. But the Spirit lives in the present. The Spirit anchors you in the now. When you walk in the Spirit, the past loses its power to define you because you no longer see it as a prison, but as a place of learning. The future loses its power to intimidate you because you trust that each step is guided. You stop replaying old conversations, reliving old wounds, imagining worst-case scenarios, and rehearsing fears. Instead, you begin to inhabit the present with a level of peace that the flesh could never produce. The present becomes a sacred space where God can work, where clarity emerges, where intuition becomes audible, where wisdom is accessible, and where your spirit has full authority to guide your decisions. One of the clearest signs of spiritual victory is the transformation of your desires. The flesh desires excess, indulgence, validation, distraction, and emotional gratification. These desires are loud, urgent, and temporary. They promise relief, but never deliver fulfillment. The Spirit desires truth, alignment, growth, peace, purpose, wisdom, and connection with God. These desires are steady, quiet, deeply rooted, and enduring. When the Spirit becomes your governing force, your desires naturally shift away from what once weakened you and toward what strengthens you. Temptations that once felt overwhelming lose their appeal. Habits that once felt impossible to break suddenly feel incompatible with the person you are becoming. Activities that once consumed your time no longer interest you. People who once influenced you no longer hold the same power. This shift does not happen through force, but through transformation. You do not have to fight to stop desiring what harms you. You simply outgrow it. This is one of the greatest victories of the Spirit, not the suppression of harmful desires, but the elevation of your soul to a higher appetite, one that hungers for truth instead of pleasure, for purpose instead of distraction, for depth instead of stimulation. When your desires are purified, your destiny becomes clearer. Another profound shift that occurs when the Spirit redefines your life is the transformation of your relationship with pain. The flesh fears pain and avoids discomfort at all costs. It interprets every struggle as a sign of failure, every challenge as an attack, every obstacle as a reason to give up. But the Spirit interprets pain differently. The Spirit sees pain as a teacher, as a sculptor, as a purifier. The Spirit understands that every difficulty is an opportunity for growth, that every struggle strengthens your character, that every trial expands your capacity, and that every moment of discomfort stretches your identity toward transformation. When the Spirit leads, pain no longer breaks you, it builds you. You learn to endure hardship with resilience, to face uncertainty with trust, to confront adversity with clarity. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is this shaping within me?" This shift in perspective is one of the clearest signs that the flesh is losing power and the Spirit is gaining authority. When pain becomes a partner in transformation rather than an enemy, the flesh can no longer control your reactions. As the Spirit continues to redefine your inner world, your relationship with others also transforms. The flesh reacts to people through insecurity, comparison, fear, pride, attachment, avoidance, or emotional dependency. The flesh either clings to others to fill its voids or pushes them away to protect its wounds. The Spirit, however, engages in relationships through truth, clarity, compassion, boundaries, and authenticity. You begin to love people without losing yourself. You begin to forgive without reopening old wounds. You begin to serve without seeking validation. You begin to speak with kindness without compromising your values. Toxic relationships naturally fall away because the Spirit no longer tolerates environments that suffocate your growth. Healthy relationships flourish because the Spirit qualities within you, patience, humility, awareness, emotional stability, generosity, create harmony and connection. You stop expecting others to fix you, complete you, or heal you because the Spirit has already begun doing that work internally. Your relationships become expressions of your growth, not attempts to hide your brokenness. The final victory of the Spirit also reshapes your perception of purpose. The flesh seeks purpose through achievement, status, recognition, and external success. These pursuits are fragile because they depend on circumstances outside your control. When the flesh drives your purpose, setbacks become identity crises, failures become proof that you are unworthy, and success becomes an addiction that never truly satisfies. But the Spirit defines purpose differently. Purpose becomes an internal alignment rather than an external accomplishment. It becomes the expression of your true identity rather than the pursuit of validation. The Spirit reveals that purpose is not something you chase, but something you embody. It is found in your growth, your integrity, your relationships, your awareness, your calling, and your obedience to God's guidance. Even the smallest actions become meaningful when they are aligned with truth. You begin to understand that purpose is not a destination but a way of being. When the Spirit leads, your life becomes purposeful in every moment, regardless of external circumstances. As the Spirit redefines your identity and destiny, inner peace becomes your default state rather than a momentary feeling. Peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of alignment. It is the quiet confidence that you are guided, supported, protected, and strengthened. It is the stability that allows you to move through life with clarity, even when storms arise. The flesh cannot produce peace because it is fueled by anxiety, urgency, craving, and emotional volatility. The Spirit produces peace because it is connected to truth. When you walk in the Spirit, You stop trying to control everything because you trust the process. You stop fearing the unknown because you trust the guidance within you. You stop resisting change because you understand that transformation is essential. Peace becomes your home, not because life becomes easy, but because your spirit becomes strong. One of the greatest gifts of spiritual victory is discernment. Discernment is the ability to distinguish between truth and illusion, between spirit and flesh, between impulse and intuition, between fear and wisdom. Discernment protects you from deception, manipulation, emotional entanglement, and spiritual stagnation. The flesh is easily deceived because it reacts without thinking, desires without understanding, and fears without questioning. The spirit sees through appearances. It recognizes the intentions behind actions, the truth behind words, the energy behind environments, and the consequences behind decisions. When discernment grows, your life becomes clearer. You stop wasting time on people who drain you. You stop engaging in battles that do not matter. You stop repeating patterns that once kept you trapped. Discernment is a sign of spiritual maturity because it reflects the union of truth, intuition, and awareness. The final victory of the spirit also brings resilience. Resilience is not the ability to avoid falling, but the ability to rise quickly, to learn deeply, and to grow continuously. When the flesh leads, every setback feels catastrophic because the flesh attaches identity to failure. But when the spirit leads, setbacks become stepping stones. You no longer fear mistakes because you trust that you will rise stronger each time. You no longer fear uncertainty because you trust that clarity will come. You no longer fear loss because you trust that what is aligned will remain. This resilience becomes one of your greatest strengths. It allows you to move through life with confidence, courage, and unwavering determination. At the culmination of spiritual transformation, gratitude becomes your natural response to life. Not because everything becomes perfect, but because you begin to see the purpose in everything. The Spirit reveals that even the darkest moments contributed to your growth, that even the most painful experiences strengthened your character, that even the most confusing seasons shaped your identity. Gratitude becomes the lens through which you perceive your life. It transforms your relationship with yourself, with others, with God, and with your own story. Gratitude elevates your spirit and disarms the flesh, because the flesh cannot coexist with gratitude. The flesh complains, the spirit appreciates. The flesh resents, the spirit remembers. The flesh fears, the spirit trusts. The final and perhaps most profound victory of the spirit is freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from bondage, freedom from fear, from shame, from compulsions, from insecurity, from emotional imprisonment, from past narratives, from destructive habits, from distorted identities. Freedom is the natural result of alignment. It is the liberation of your soul from everything that once kept you small, silent, hidden, and afraid. This freedom allows you to walk boldly into your destiny, to live without the weight of old burdens, to act with clarity, to speak with authenticity, and to rise with purpose. Freedom is not a destination, but a daily choice, a daily alignment, a daily awareness that you are no longer governed by the flesh. When the Spirit redefines your life, you become a different person, not because your personality changes, but because your essence becomes whole. You awaken to a deeper reality. You recognize that you are part of something larger than your struggles, larger than your fears, larger than your past. You understand that you were created with intention, guided with purpose, strengthened through difficulty, and transformed through truth. You become a vessel of light, of clarity, of peace, of resilience, of wisdom. The final victory is not about conquering the world, but conquering yourself. And so, if this message speaks to your spirit, If you feel the call to continue walking this path of awakening and transformation, I invite you warmly and sincerely to subscribe to the channel so you can continue receiving teachings that will strengthen your spiritual journey every step of the way.